Hi guys, it's time for another weekly update. So, this week I've been full of a lot of false starts as a writer. I'm working on the fifth Seven Keys book and it's not going particularly well. Part of the problem is that I had a really good idea for a story, but I don't want to write it. um, I think sometimes that happens to writers. We get a lot of ideas. Everyone has a lot of ideas every day. You just create lists. I actually, since reading Choose Yourself, I've gotten into the habit of creating a list of 10 ideas every single morning. So there's a lot out there, and sometimes you cling to one because you think it is brilliant, but in the actual execution, it's subpar. So that's where I found myself. I've had a lot of starts and stops this week. I had about 10,000 words done overall for Seven Keys 5, and got to this point where I was like, why am I doing this? And that's, when you're at that point, you've got to say, if you don't have an answer to that question, you just got to do something else. So what I've been trying to do is figure out where I want to be, what I want to be doing, where the story needs to go, where the characters need the story to go. And I was stuck in this mode of not having a clear definition for myself of what the stakes were. The story itself, I think, ultimately felt too generic as an urban fantasy story. And it involved some decisions for the world that I didn't want to make. Actually, it involved some decisions for characters I didn't want to make. So, where I'm at this morning is I'm actually going to completely start over. At this point, I'm actually more than a month behind my deadline. But sometimes you have to do that. And I actually got into a similar situation with the fourth book, where I had written 2.5 drafts. I had written 2 full drafts of the book and was halfway through the third draft and was going, this isn't getting any better. So I just stopped working on it and came back to it a couple of days later and started from the beginning. And I wrote that book actually over the course of like 3 days. I was on vacation at the time, so I don't want anyone to think like I have superpowers when it comes to writing. I just had a full day to be able to work on it and was able to nail out over 10,000 words a day for 3 days in a row. And then finish up. And even then, the book itself was infinitely better that last time through, and I had to go back and rewrite the ending. Because my editor pointed out that it wasn't very good, rightfully so. Actually, the ending of that book, the original ending of that book, kind of sucked. It was flat, and that's one of the reasons you want to have a second set of eyes. Now, I tell people I don't believe in editors. But that's not necessarily what I think is true. When I say I don't believe in editors, what I mean is like the concept of professional edit is one that like it has a lot to do with being a professional writer. The traditional rules don't necessarily apply, and that is not the same as saying don't have a proofreader at all. I don't think proofreading and editing are the same skills. My editor, who I use, and always have a second set of eyes in your book. No matter what, always find a way to have a second set of eyes in your book. And the editor I use is actually my father, who has no training as an editor. He's not a professional editor. He's not a English literature major or anything like that. He's just someone who has read a couple thousand books in his lifetime and intuitively knows the structure of story and understands the difference between technical language and voice language. And that is something that's really important, actually. Probably the most important thing you can do with looking for an editor is find someone who understands the structure of a story and your voice. And your voice is very important because I have worked with an editor who was very good at her job. She was really very good at being an editor, but she didn't understand my voice, and that conflict created a little bit of bitterness for me, and that's not fair to her, because she did a really great job with the proofreading and giving some positive feedback that actually did work into the story. And so I feel like I'm a flip-flopper here on you, but really when I talk about the traditional editing model, I'm talking about someone who is going to come in and just do a lot of the stuff that you should be doing anyway. Like, in my mind, a developmental editor is you. You need to focus on teaching yourself the craft tools to create a good story. And then having a second person, it is always important to have a second person look at things. And proofreading, again, this is not even touching on proofreading, because obviously you need to have your stuff proofread. But most of the time, when you see someone say this book was not well edited, they're either A, talking about proofreading, which is a completely different issue, or they're talking about they just don't understand what they didn't like about it. And a lot of that has to do with craft and structure. So in that spirit, I've actually been reading quite a bit about structure lately. I just finished Libby Hawker's new book, Take Off Your Pants. And it was very eye-opening in how she plots and structures and her way of doing things. And I think that reading that book started my mind going, why am I not enjoying writing Seven Keys 5, what I've got now? So what I did was I sat down and went through her book with my outline and tried to figure out what was going on, and I realized I wasn't enjoying the story. Another book that I just started, and I'm third or so of the way through, is Superstructure. And Superstructure is... Give me just a second. I'm going to look up and see who wrote Superstructure. I've actually read a couple of his books. The other one is Plot Your Novel from the Middle. Was a really good one that I recommend to a lot of people. It gives you an idea of what that important central focus... James Scott Bell. So, in the early part of Superstructure, he talks about the death conflict. And I realized, ultimately, the reason my plot that I had for Seven Keys 5, although it was an interesting story idea and could make a good non-Seven Keys story... it had no death conflict for Terry Howard, my protagonist. Like, yes, it had the ability, there was tension and things that needed to be addressed, but it didn't have, Terry had no vested interest in it, other than one scene. And really, I had plotted my entire outline around this one scene that I didn't honestly want to write. Not because don't think it's a great scene or it's a great story impact moment, but because me as a writer dreaded what happened in that scene. So I realized this morning while I was reading Superstructure that I had to find out what that death moment was, what that threat was for Terry. And I think I had a breakthrough. So I was going to sit down and start writing. This morning I've got a little bit more clear, cohesive thought about what I want to do. I've re-outlined the book using Libby Hawker's method, which opened my eyes to a lot of things structurally. And now I'm ready to go. I think I'm going to try to bust out 10,000 words today. It's a Saturday. So I'm going to try that. I can't guarantee that it'll happen, but basically my weekly update is that I am reporting in at 0 words on my current project. It is completely scrapped. I am starting over from the beginning. Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you can salvage it. Sometimes you can't. And so today is my salvage or my scrapping it day. I'm just starting over. The other thing I wanted to report is I've started tracking my read-through rates on my books. I actually spent a little bit of time this week like completely going through my spreadsheet and figuring it out. And I'm worried. I'm starting to wonder if I should try rewriting book one. Actually, I've been wondering that for a while. The amount of storytelling difference I've learned, like the amount of sheer craftsmanship I've learned as a storyteller between writing book one and now is infinite. The worry there is, though, that if I start rewriting book one, I'll have to do book two and book three and book four and just keep going infinitely on an infinite loop. And that keeps popping up in my brain, so I can't seem to get it loose from my head that it's a waste of time, that I just need to keep improving my craft and moving forward. And the numbers showed me that I have a 2% read-through rate between book one and book two, but I have a 50% read-through rate between books 2 and 3. So I'm beginning to wonder if maybe there is something to it there, or if it's just the fact that book one is perma-free and all I really have to go on is the number of downloads. So anyway, that's the things that are going on in my head. If you're struggling with similar situations, do yourself a favor and take a step back and ask yourself, why do I want to write this? And if you don't have an answer, then maybe you shouldn't. There's no harm in that. There are lots of ideas. There's lots of things you can write. There's a lot of stories to tell out there. So you don't have to marry yourself to something that you don't actually want to do. So that's this week's update. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Do me a favor and subscribe to the YouTube channel or on iTunes to the New Writer Podcast. I would love to get a review. You can email me at contact@newwriterpodcast.com if you have any questions, or if you have feedback. Comment on the YouTube show, comment on the blog, newwriterpodcast.com. I love to hear from you. And if you're a writer who wants to come on and talk about your struggles and your journey as a writer, shoot me an email. I would love to talk to you. I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to help share your story with the world. Thank you.